Hi everyone, this is the online lecture for inflation. This week's topic is split into two. One on inflation and the other one on unemployment. It's done over 2 weeks. So this online lecture is for inflation only. Okay, unemployment will follow next week. Now what is inflation? Inflation is defined as the persistent and sustained increase in the price level uh, of goods and services in the economy. Now, it cannot be a one product, two product that's getting expensive that we call inflation. It has to be the most of the goods and services are getting more expensive. All right, and it cannot be a 1 day, 2 day kind of thing. It has to be quite a long-term kind of price increase. Now, like the measurement of GDP, we usually measure price changes over the year. All right, and further perhaps divide into quarters or months. Okay, so it has to have a lengthy period of time that we see prices are going up in general, that we define this as inflation. Now some terminology. Inflation means an increase in the price level. Okay, deflation means a decrease in the price level. Okay, now in this topic we calculate the inflation rate. Is a annual percentage change in the price level. All right, so it's also kind of rate, similar to what we have learned how to calculate for economic growth rate. So it's a percentage change representing how much prices have changed. Now prices can go up, in that case it's called inflation. Prices can come down, in that case it's called deflation. Okay, so note the terminology. Now, if the price level is rising, things are becoming more expensive, we say that the inflation rate is positive. Okay, that means the percentage change is a plus to demonstrate that the price level is rising. Now, when things are becoming cheaper, price level is falling, inflation rate is negative. Okay, because inflation measures the increase in the price level. So when the price level is falling, the rate that we calculate will become negative. Okay. Now, what's hyperinflation? Hyperinflation refers to an extremely rapid rise in the price level. Now, we're not talking about a single digit or even double digit kind of inflation rate that's called hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is some textbook call it runaway inflation, very, very high level of inflation rate. I suggest you guys take a look at the Zimbabwe example that are posted on LMS. Okay, that you see what is the meaning of hyperinflation. Okay, runaway, very, very high kind of inflation rate. Okay, now this is the inflation rate formula. We take CPI this year minus CPI last year divided by CPI last year times 100%. Now the formula structure is the same as your economic growth rate structure. Okay, this is a percentage change mathematical formula. Okay, so you should be used to it by now. This year minus last year over last year times 100%. Okay, now some of you are wondering what is CPI. Now CPI is called Consumer Price Index. It's an index measuring how prices have changed. Now we have encountered something similar when we were calculating things in the GDP chapter. Your CPI, okay, is also your deflator. Okay, it's the same index, but used for different purposes. Okay, so the index that's measuring changes in the price level is your CPI. So the deflator, the use of a deflator, the deflator itself is actually your CPI. Okay, so it's an index based on a base year prices. So compared to the base year, how much has prices changed? All right, so your deflator is your CPI. Now the CPI is obtained by economists or the government selecting a basket of goods and services that people need and then measuring the average prices from there. Okay, this one we have gone through in lecture. Okay, so just remember your CPI is your consumer price index and it measures percentage changes in price level based on an index which is derived from changes from the base year prices. Okay, so it's a number that's higher or lower than 100. Okay. Now, we now take a look at how inflation is being reflected on the ADAS diagram. Now, there's two types of inflation that can be demonstrated or illustrated by the ADS diagram. One is called demand pull inflation. One is called cost push inflation. Okay, demand pull inflation, as you can see here, the underlying cause is an increase in AD. Cost push, the underlying cause is a fall in SRAS. Okay, both of these inflations are different types of inflation, and you must be very clear what they are. Now, what is a demand pull inflation? Now, the cause of demand pull inflation is the result from an initial increase in AD. Now, by now, you should know what shifts your AD curves. Okay, so when your CIGX or minus M changes, your AD curve will shift. So for your AD curve to increase or shift right, your CIGX, which are the positive component, must go up and your minus M must fall. Okay, so this change will cause a rise in your AD. Now, why or how does your AD increase? How will it cause increase in the price level? Let's take a look. Now, we call this rise in AD as excessive spending. Now, this usually occurs during a period of economic upturn. Now, that means that your economy could already be at full employment output, and yet people spend more. Maybe consumption increase some more, or government spends even more, private companies invest even more, or you have exports rising. Okay, this occurs in a period of a relatively strong economic performance, like it's already at full employment. Okay, you are already producing at potential, and yet spending, which is measured by AD, goes up. So we call this kind of spending excessive, too much. Okay, so excessive spending is a cause of demand pull inflation. Okay, and it occurs during an economic upturn. All right, now let's take a look at how does the diagram looks like. Now you can see your starting point is here. Okay, at full employment output. All right, your initial stage you start from, the starting point is your full employment output. So it's here. Now we mentioned that the cause of demand pull inflation is excessive spending. So at here, you are already producing at potential. See, YF is here, but yet your AD rises some more. Okay, could be your CIGX rising or your minus M falling. So AD then rises, shift to the right, and you end up in this equilibrium. Okay, in this equilibrium point, as you can see. All right. Now, the effect is that your price level goes up. Okay, and then your real GDP goes up. Now, at this equilibrium point, the new equilibrium point, you are no longer at full employment output. You are now higher than full employment output. You are now producing at Y1, okay, which is higher than YF. So real GDP has gone up. Your price level has also gone up, okay, at the new equilibrium point. Now, we mentioned from last week lecture and the week before that, okay, that the gap here that you're producing more than your potential, okay, is called inflationary gap. Okay, it's an inflationary gap. All right. So label all the gaps when you see them. Okay. So this is the first stage of demand pull inflation, whereby your AD rises. Okay, shift to the right, the curve. Okay, at a time when you are already producing at potential. All right. Now, before we go to the next stage of demand pull inflation, one common questions that we always have is what's the difference between inflation and inflationary gap? Right, it sounds quite similar. Now, look at the diagram, and I'll show you okay what the difference between these two things are. When we talk about inflation, it's showing an increase in the price level. So we are looking at this axis, okay, the price axis, the y-axis. Okay, so as you can see here, after AD shift to the right, your price level goes up. Your inflation is measured here, okay, along this axis. So when price increase, okay, on this axis, we call it inflation. Now, inflationary gap is measured on the real GDP axis, the x-axis. Okay, is output measurement. Now, inflationary gap measures how much you exceeded your production, exceeded your potential by. This gap is called inflationary gap. It's how much higher you are producing above your potential. Okay, so one is a output measurement and one is a price measurement. Your price measurement is inflation, your output measurement, okay, is your inflationary gap. So these two are different things. All right, you must tell the difference. Now, to continue our story on demand pull inflation, what happened just now was when AD curve has increased, and then you were here, okay, as shown by the mouse. Now, this point, you're producing higher than your full employment output is not sustainable, okay, because you're overproducing. At Y1, you're overproducing. What is happening on the ground is that you're overstretching your resources. You're asking your workers, for example, to put in overtime every day. Okay, you're overstretching your land, you're overstretching your capital, all right, you're overstretching your labor. Now, when you do that, when you're producing above full employment output, your costs will catch up with you. Okay, it will become more expensive to produce because your current resources cannot sustain production at this level. Okay, so for example, your labor will begin to be stretched and there'll be shortage of workers working at that higher output level. Okay, now when that happens, your wage rate has to go up because you're asking people to overproduce, to overwork. Okay, your wage cost must go up. So when that happens, your cost of production goes up, and as you know from last week's lecture, cost of production goes up, your SRAS will shift to the left. Okay, so at the end of the whole transition, you are here back at full employment output. Okay, so this second stage, these further effects of demand pull inflation, the second stage is when you can no longer sustain production at this level, which is higher than your potential. You have labor shortage, okay, wages goes up, your cost of production goes up, SRAS shift to the left. Okay, now when we evaluate the whole picture, your final equilibrium point is here, whereby you're back at full employment output again. Now, your output has gained nothing. Okay, you're still at YF, similar to your starting point at stage 1. But what has happened is prices have gone all the way up from P0 to P1 and then to P2. Okay, so the second stage is here. Okay, and your price goes up further, but your output falls to YF. Okay, so this is the second stage whereby your cost goes up and then you produce less and you're back at full employment output. Just take note, the economy gains nothing. You're still at YF at the end of the day, but your prices have gone all the way up from P0 to P1 and then to P2. All right. Now, the second type of inflation is a cost push inflation. Now, what causes your cost push inflation is very different from what causes your demand pull inflation. Okay, the underlying cause of this cost push inflation is a rise in the cost of production, which results in the leftward shift of SRAS curve. Now let's go and take a look at revise a little bit. We mentioned this last week already, but let's go and revise what causes your cost of production to go up. Let's take a look. Now, your cost of production goes up when, for example, your wages goes up, okay, the salaries you pay to your workers goes up, or an increase in the price of raw materials, okay? Now, when things become more expensive, your inputs become more expensive, your cost of production goes up, and then your SRAS curve shifts to the left. Let's take a look at the diagram. Now, you can see here, your starting point is here at full employment output again, okay? Your starting point is full employment output. So what happens is we could have a scenario whereby your cost of crude oil goes up. Okay, so your cost of production goes up and your SRAS shift to the left. Okay, you end up in this point. Now this point has a name to it. It's called stagflation. Now stagflation is a combination of the word stagnation, which means that your output is falling, and inflation. Okay, which means that your price level is rising. Okay, now you can see when your equilibrium point changes after SRAS curve shift to the left, your new equilibrium point is here. And when you look at the changes to your price level and real GDP, your price level has gone up, which means that there's inflation, yeah? And your real GDP has fallen. Okay, so in the economy, it's not a good time. Okay, there's stagnation. The economy is not growing. So this word stagflation, okay, records down these two kind of effects, whereby prices are rising and then your output is falling. Okay, now after you have shifted at the stagflation point, okay, you are producing lower than your full employment output. Okay, so you learned from last week lecture that when you're producing less than your full employment output, okay, this difference in output level is called a recessionary gap. Okay, recessionary gap. All right. Now, so this is a very serious situation for your economy, whereby your output is falling. That means your companies are not producing as much. Likely, people are losing their jobs, and at the same time, prices are rising. So it's like a double whammy for the economy. Okay, and this is not a situation that's very easily resolved. Okay, we shall talk more about this cost push inflation or stagflation. Okay, um, in the next few topics. Okay, so you must be able to tell the difference between cost push inflation and demand pull inflation. Okay, make sure you revise them properly. All right, I see you next week for unemployment.